He spent hours wandering the halls, compelled to inspect every door, every shadowed alcove, every stair that creaked under his tentative step. The house, once silent, seemed alive in ways he could neither measure nor comprehend. Rooms shifted subtly when unobserved. Corridors stretched, walls narrowed, and floors sloped ever so slightly, as if the architecture itself had been manipulated by the countless minds now whispering through the bracelet. Candles flickered with a sentient rhythm, casting elongated shadows that mirrored his movements with subtle delay, hinting at something unseen following him. The library became his sanctuary and prison alike. Piles of diaries, ledgers, and letters had accumulated into precarious towers, each chronicling the slow descent of a previous owner into obsession, madness, or disappearance. Edward pored over them relentlessly, his pulse sensing to the cadence of the whispers. The accounts varied in tone, some mournful, some frantic, some resigned, but all conveyed the same truth. The bracelet did not merely adorn, it claimed. And now, Edward sensed, it was claiming him. He began to hear more than whispers. He heard laughter, sobs, mutterings of anger, and lamentations of despair. Sometimes they would speak in unison, a cacophony that pressed against the edges of his sanity. Obey, follow, you are ours. Their collective will wrapped around him, insinuating itself into every decision, every movement, every thought. Edward knew he could resist only with tremendous effort, and each act of defiance brought discomfort, a tightness in his chest, a subtle shiver along his spine, as if the bracelet were punishing him for hesitation. His nights became journeys through shadowed corridors of the mind. Dreams no longer offered respite. They were battlegrounds of the past. Edward would awaken to find his chamber subtly altered. Books rearranged, papers scattered as though studied in the night by invisible hands. Sometimes he would glimpse figures at the periphery of his vision, silhouettes of previous wearers, standing, watching, silently pressing the weight of their histories upon him. He knew, in the unspoken language of obsession, that they were testing him, preparing him for what lay beyond understanding. Edward began to see patterns in the bracelets, whispers, revelations that were at once enlightening and terrifying. The runes along its surface were not merely decorative. They were a record, a map, a spell that bound generations into a continuous loop of influence and possession. Each owner had added to it unconsciously, their will shaping its essence until it became a repository of knowledge, memory, and malice. The bracelet was no longer an object but a nexus, a living archive of souls, each contributing to its sentience and ensuring that no future bearer could remain untouched. He attempted to remove it once, as a scholar might remove a cursed manuscript from study. The effort was brief, yet excruciating. The metal resisted, tightening, constricting, as though sensing his intent. Pain radiated through his wrist and up his arm, the whispers escalating into a crescendo of reproach and warning. Edward gasped, surrendering at last, realizing that the bracelet did not tolerate separation. Its will had intertwined with his own too thoroughly, and any attempt at defiance merely tightened the bonds. As the storm clouds gathered outside Ravenscroft Hall, echoing the turmoil within, Edward found himself drawn to the hidden chamber beneath the mansion, a subterranean room whose door had been uncovered through the persistent guidance of the whispers. The walls were inscribed with faintly luminous symbols, echoing the runes of the bracelet itself. He felt a surge of recognition, a resonance between his flesh and the ancient metal. Here lay the secret of the curse, the origin of the bracelet's insidious power. Descending into the chamber, Edward's heartbeat accelerated, each pulse a drum beat in harmony with the bracelet's subtle vibration. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, old incense, and the faint copper tang of blood long vanished. Shadows gathered here with a life of their own, stretching across the walls, converging toward the center of the room where a small pedestal awaited. Upon it rested an identical bracelet, faintly glowing, as if anticipating his arrival. Edward understood, with a chill that crept through his spine, that the bracelet he wore was only one in a lineage of many, each crafted to draw the bearer deeper into the continuum of possession. He reached out, compelled by forces both fearsome and fascinating. As his fingers brushed the second bracelet, the whispers converged into a singular, commanding voice. "You are of us. You belong. Accept the weight and know the legacy. Refuse and be consumed." Edward felt the cold tendrils of destiny wrapping around him, tightening, bending his will. He knew he had reached the point of no return. The descent was complete. Resistance was futile. Ravenscroft Hall itself seemed to breathe around him. The walls pulsed subtly, as if alive, the portrait's eyes gleaming with recognition, the shadows murmuring in low, hissing tones. Edward felt his consciousness expand, intertwined with the chorus of previous wearers, their memories flooding into him. Pain and ecstasy, fear and desire, knowledge and madness, all merged into a singular awareness. He understood with terrifying clarity that the bracelet's power was both cumulative and recursive. Each new bearer added to its strength, and each previous soul remained present, guiding, observing, and ensnaring. By the first light of dawn, Edward emerged from the chamber chain. His movements were precise, deliberate, yet unnervingly graceful, as if some part of him had been reshaped to suit the bracelet's design. The whispers had quieted, satisfied for the moment, but the weight of their presence remained, a constant pressure beneath his skin. He was no longer merely Edward Mortimer. He was part of the lineage, a living conduit for the bracelet's shadowed legacy. The descent into darkness had not concluded. It had only deepened, preparing him for the final stages of the curse. In the solitude of Ravenscroft Hall, with storm clouds dispersing and sunlight timidly touching the edges of the turrets, Edward realized a truth that both terrified and fascinated him. The bracelet did not merely alter its bearer. It perfected him in its own dark and twisted fashion, aligning his will with its centuries-long purpose. He was now inseparable from its influence. His identity fused with the memories, obsessions, and desires of all who had worn it before. And in that fusion, the mansion, the bracelet, and the whispers became one, a singular entity, eternal, patient, and inexorably consuming. Edward Mortimer, once a scholar and historian, now stood at the edge of a threshold from which there could be no return. He was both observer and participant, student and vessel, lost and yet illuminated by the collective consciousness of shadow. The descent into the bracelet's dominion was complete, and the next phase awaited. The ultimate surrender of self, the merging of flesh and shadow, the consummation of the curse that had bound Ravenscroft Hall and its relics for generations. The storm raged outside Ravenscroft Hall, a tempest of wind and rain that shook the ancient timbers and rattled the leaded windows. Inside, Edward Mortimer moved with an unnatural precision, the bracelet upon his wrist gleaming with a cold inner light. Its pulse, imperceptible to the untrained eye, beat in time with his own heartbeat, or perhaps he had become attuned to its rhythm entirely. The whispers, once cacophonous, had become singular, directive, insistent. It is time. Accept fully. Surrender. Edward's reflection in the long, cracked mirror of the grand hall was no longer recognizable. Pale, hollowed, and framed by shadows that moved independently of the storm outside, his eyes bore the depth of centuries. Within them, the faintest flicker of other souls, previous wearers, glimmered and danced. He reached up, brushing the glass with a trembling hand, and the mirror pulsed softly, as though alive, responding to his touch. The bracelet tightened almost imperceptibly, a reminder, a command, and Edward shivered at the intimacy of its hold. Guided by the whispers, he descended to the hidden chamber beneath the mansion, the subterranean sanctum where the lineage of the bracelet's curse had first been chronicled. Candles had been lit by unseen hands. Their flames flickered in strange synchrony, casting elongated shadows that writhed along the walls, coiling like serpents. Edward approached the pedestal where the identical bracelet had once lain, now empty. The whispers urged him forward, encouraging a step that was both deliberate and compelled. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, incense, and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Edward knelt, feeling the pulse of the bracelet against his wrist intensify. "You belong. Join. Complete the circle," he heard, a voice both many and singular. His mind teetered between fear and awe, terror and exhilaration. He felt himself dissolving, fragmenting into the whispers themselves, yet simultaneously merging, as though the boundaries of self were being rewritten. Visions surged behind his closed eyelids. He saw a lady as old, clutching the bracelet in desperation, her eyes wide with the unspoken knowledge of what was to come. He saw the merchant from Prague, thrashing in his final hours, and the Baroness in Vienna, laughing madly, even as the world slipped away from her. Each vision was suffused with dread, obsession, and the inevitability of the bracelet's dominion. Edward's own image appeared among them, pale and trembling, yet inexorably drawn forward towards surrender. Undi da lava ray to adi surrender. The whispers coalesced into a command, a singular directive that resonated in his bones. Place your hand upon the stone. Accept the weight. Join the gallery. Edward obeyed. As his fingers brushed the cold surface of the pedestal, a shock ran through his entire being, a mixture of pain, pleasure, and rapture. Light, unearthly and silver, flared from the bracelet, illuminating the chamber with a brilliance that seemed impossible. The shadows danced wildly, stretching and coiling, then converging toward Edward, as though the mansion itself had come alive. Time fractured. Seconds stretched into hours. Hours collapsed into moments. Edward felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his mortal frame, flowing into the collective memory of all who had worn the bracelet before him. His heartbeat, breath, and thought became indistinguishable from the rhythm of the cursed jewel. He was simultaneously himself and not himself, observer and participant, prisoner and liberator. The whispers became songs, lamentations, and histories, layering upon each other until they were inseparable from his own essence. A sudden violent flash of lightning illuminated the chamber, revealing Edward's reflection in the polished stone of the pedestal. The face staring back was no longer wholly human. It was a mosaic of countless lives. Eyes layered upon eyes, expressions overlapping. The bracelet glowed fiercely, and Edward felt his last resistances crumble. The surrender was absolute, the final act of assimilation into the legacy of the jewel. Above ground, Ravenscroft Hall quivered. The storm battered the roof, lightning striking the highest turrets with a deafening crash, and the walls groaned as if the very structure mourned, or celebrated, the transformation that had occurred below. From within the mansion, no sound emerged except the faint hum of the bracelet, now resonating throughout every stone and timber. Shadows stretched along the halls, coalescing into forms both human and unreal, moving as though the house itself were alive with the presence of the recently claimed. By dawn, the storm had passed. Ravenscroft Hall stood silent, seemingly unchanged, yet entirely altered. The hidden chamber was empty, save for the pedestal, upon which the bracelet now rested, gleaming with a calm yet sinister light. No trace of Edward remained, no sound, no footprint, no breath of human life. Yet, for those who approached the pedestal, the bracelet seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive, and sometimes, if one stared too long, they could glimpse a shadow behind the silver, a fragment of Edward Mortimer, entwined with the countless others who had surrendered to its dominion. The mansion resumed its patient watch over the moor, silent yet vigilant. The whispers continued, faint and imperceptible to all but the most sensitive ear, carrying the weight of the cursed lineage. And the bracelet waited, cold, beautiful, and eternal, for the next hand that would reach for it, for the next soul that would join the gallery of shadows and whispers. Ravenscroft Hall had claimed another. The bracelet had claimed another. The cycle endured, as it always would, weaving its threads of obsession, despair, and power through the hearts of the living, leaving only whispers and shadows in its wake. Edward Mortimer was gone, yet in the depths of the jewel, his essence persisted, watching, whispering, and waiting. Years had passed since the last storm had lashed against Ravenscroft Hall, yet the mansion remained as solemn, silent, and imposing as ever, its turrets piercing the moor like the spires of some forgotten cathedral. Travelers who passed its gates spoke of a subtle unease, a chill that clung to the skin, and a feeling of being watched. Few dared approach, and fewer still lingered long enough to notice that the windows, shuttered for decades, seemed sometimes to glimmer with a spectral light, as though the hall were awake, listening. In London, far removed from the wind-swept moors, a small gallery prepared an exhibition of curiosities and relics acquired from estates across Europe. Among them, displayed in a glass case, lay a delicate silver bracelet, blackened in places and inscribed with intricate rune. It gleamed under the gallery lights with a vitality that defied explanation, as though some unseen current of life flowed within its metal coils. The placard beneath it read simply, "A bracelet from Ravenscroft Hall, c. 18th century." Yet those who gazed too long into its subtle reflections reported peculiar sensations. A tightening of the chest, a shiver along the spine, the faintest echo of a whisper that seemed to curl around the mind. "You belong." Among the visitors that day was a young historian, Clara Pembroke, drawn by a fascination for artifacts of superstition and legend. She leaned closer to the glass, studying the bracelet with meticulous attention. The runes were elegant, hypnotic. Their design suggested not only craftsmanship, but intention, a pattern meant to captivate and ensnare. As she reached her fingers toward the case, though not touching, she felt a subtle pulse emanate from the silver, a heartbeat that seemed synchronous with her own. Her pulse quickened, and she blinked, catching the faintest flicker of movement within the bracelet itself, as though a shadow moved behind the coils. For the briefest instant, Clara swore she saw a face, paled and hollowed, eyes layered with others' gazes, an echo of the past. It was gone when she blinked, yet the impression lingered. An intimate familiarity, a whisper curling at the edge of perception, almost imperceptible, yet persistent. "We remember, we wait." "You are next," she shivered, stepping back instinctively, though her curiosity burned with it. Back on the moors, Ravenscroft Hall remained still, yet no longer empty. Within the depths of its hidden chamber, the pedestal that once held the bracelet now stood bare, yet the mansion pulsed with awareness, its very stones alive with the memories of Edward Mortimer and all who had preceded him. Shadows lengthened in the corners, converging upon the windows that looked out toward the city, as though the hall itself had reached across the miles, aware of the bracelet now displayed in London. The bracelet, though removed from its origin, had not lost its essence. Its whispers had traversed the distance, faint but persistent, carrying with them the echo of centuries of obsession and surrender. Every soul claimed, every mind entwined, every whisper and lament had become part of its eternal chorus. And now, in the presence of Clara, it began once more to weave its influence, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet inexorable. Meanwhile, within the gallery, she noticed the faintest tremor in the reflections of the glass case. The bracelet's surface glimmered with a light not cast by the overhead lamps, a spectral, internal radiance. She leaned closer, drawn by the subtle pull of curiosity and fascination, unaware of the legacy that awaited her. And in that instant, the whispers became slightly louder, a susurration of countless voices layered together. Come, accept, join, Ravenscroft remembers. Clara's breath caught. Her mind shivered at the intimacy of the sensation, the familiarity that was impossible, yet undeniable. Somewhere deep within, a memory not her own seemed to stir. Fear, obsession, surrender. She stepped back, yet even as she did, a tremor of compulsion tugged at her will. It was not yet overpowering, but it was insistent, subtle, and inexorable. The bracelet had found a new observer. It had begun to plant the first seeds of obsession, whispering not only through sound, but through perception, suggestion, and the deep, shadowed corridors of the human mind. And somewhere, far away on the moors, Ravenscroft Hall watched with patient vigilance, waiting for the next step in the inevitable cycle. The past and the present were no longer separate. The whispers, the shadows, the bracelet, and the mansion were entwined in a lineage that knew neither pause nor end. And in the quiet of the gallery, beneath the bright, indifferent light, Clara felt a subtle tightening in her chest, a pulse in her wrist, a faint echo of 1,000 voices. We remember, we wait, we claim, you belong. And so the legacy endured, eternal and inexorable. The bracelet, beautiful and terrible, patient and sentient, awaited the next hand to reach for it, the next mind to ensnare, the next soul to join the gallery of shadows. Ravenscroft Hall, silent and vigilant, had ensured that its curse would not end. Its whispers would never fade, and its influence would stretch beyond time, distance, and mortal comprehension. All on the enjoyer adorators would Rory ha. Edward Mortimer, a shadow among shadows, lingered still within the bracelet, watching, whispering, and waiting. And now Clara, unknowingly, had stepped into the path of its dark inheritance. The cycle was poised to continue, unbroken, eternal, and merciless. The cursed bracelet gleamed in the glass case, cold and beautiful. Its whispers were faint, but resolute. Its hunger patient and unending.
And that was tonight's story. Some tales end with silence, others never end at all. They just wait in the dark, waiting for you. You've been listening to Creepy Night, where every whisper tells a story, and every story leaves a shadow. Sleep well, if you can.